Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is pro-revenge story. Gazumping occurs when an agent or seller accepts an offer you make to buy a property at an agreed price, but the property is sold to someone else. This usually happens when the vendor sells the property for a higher amount. This happened 5 years ago, and it is one of the proudest moments of my life. My best friend Melissa and her husband Alex have 5 kids together. They lived in an expensive city and rented an old 4-bedroom house for $1,800 per month. The house was very run down with a disgusting kitchen and stinking drains, but it was all they could afford at the time. Still, they made it work. The owner was a nice old lady named Mrs. Winters who was extremely wealthy and very fond of Melissa. She froze the rent for 5 years and promised to let them buy the house once they had saved enough to get a loan from the bank. "You're such wonderful tenants," Mrs. Winters would say during her rare visits. "I want to see you own this place someday." As she had helped other people in a similar way, they knew they could trust her, and so they saved every cent they could. It took them 5 years, but they finally told her they were ready. "We did it, Mrs. Winters!" Melissa called her excitedly. "We have enough for the down payment now!" 2 days later, Mrs. Winters passed away. Before anything was put in writing, enter the new owners. The lady's 4 children, Richard, Amanda, Thomas, and Stephanie. Each extremely wealthy in their own right. They inherited a huge portfolio of properties. When they first spoke to my friends, they assured them that the sale would still go through, but they would have to wait until probate had settled. "Of course, we'll honor our mother's wishes," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just give us a few months to sort out the legal matters." Confident, Melissa and Alex started making some changes to the place. They started by stripping wallpaper, painting, and making plans. Finally, probate was settled and the owners agreed to go ahead with the sale for the previously agreed price. My friends applied for the loan, but to their shock it was refused. "I don't understand," Alex told me, his voice breaking. "The bank says the asking price is $80,000 more than what we discussed with Mrs. Winters." The owners had raised the asking price without telling my friends. To make things even worse, the house would be put on the open market. In 7 days there would be an open house, and with the market the way it was, it would probably sell immediately. "It's just business," Amanda told them coldly when Melissa called to confront her. "Property values have increased significantly. We have to get market value." Melissa and Alex were devastated. They might be able to borrow enough, but it would take longer than a week to get. To make matters worse, property prices had soared recently, and rents had gone up a lot whilst theirs had been frozen. Not only were my friends going to struggle to get the money, if the place was sold to someone else and they were asked for a higher rent or were evicted, it would be nearly impossible to find an affordable place with more than 2 bedrooms. I was scared for my friends, but I was also incandescently angry. Those greedy sods were some of the wealthiest people in the city. They were screwing over a struggling family for less than $20,000 each. They didn't need the money. It was pure greed, and it was obvious that they'd always planned to do this. So while my friends scrambled to come up with the money, I started plotting. "Listen," I told Melissa over coffee in her cluttered kitchen. "These people want to sell this house at top dollar. Let's make sure nobody wants to buy it." "What do you mean?" she asked, confused. "I mean, we're going to make this place look like the worst investment ever, without actually damaging anything." I looked up advice on what helps to make a sale. We needed to make the place as undesirable as possible without making my friends look like bad tenants. Uncluttered. We moved all the furniture in from the walls, added some extra furniture and borrowed ornaments, and hung a load of motorcycle memorabilia on the walls. The place felt much smaller. "Are you sure this will work?" Alex asked as we crowded their living room with borrowed furniture. "Trust me," I replied. "Nobody wants to buy a house that feels cramped." Smell. Melissa boiled a head of cabbage on the stove, and we sprayed ammonia around the front and back doors, because it smells like all the neighborhood cats had been marking their territory. We also poured 24 rotten eggs down the drain to make it smell like sewer gas. "This is disgusting," Melissa gagged as she dumped the eggs, "but also kind of satisfying." Neighborhood. We obtained a moldy old couch and dumped it in the front yard of the neighbor across the road, with permission, of course. "Happy to help," their neighbor Dan said with a grin. "Those Winters kids never bothered to introduce themselves to any of us, not like their mother." Neighborhood X2. We started calling friends for help. Anybody with a loud and crappy car was asked to do a few laps in front of the block during the open house. The street was unusually busy that day. Everyone we knew found a reason to drive by. It was practically rush hour. "Just keep circling," I instructed our friend Steve on the phone. "Make sure your muffler is making that awful noise." "You got it," he laughed. "I've been meaning to fix it anyway, but it's perfect for today." Neighborhood X3, we called our mates from the rugby club. A big portion of our club are very large men. The next door neighbor set up a BBQ in their front yard and we offered free food and cheap beer. They came on motorcycles wearing their roughest gear. There was quite a crowd. Hey, is that the real estate agent's car? My rugby friend Marcus called out as a sleek sedan pulled up. Should we rev our bikes a bit louder? Perfect timing, I grinned. A lot of people showed up for the open house. Quite a few were in and out within minutes. One lady sat in her car and watched the party next door before driving away. The one bloke who stayed any length of time was brave enough to start up a conversation with someone leaving the party. "Do you live around here?" he asked cautiously. "Oh yeah, we're here all the time," my friend replied cheerfully. "Every couple of weeks or so we have an after-party morning and the party the night before was 3 doors up. Gets pretty wild." He also helpfully mentioned the troublesome drains that are always getting blocked by tree roots and stinking up the place. "You can smell it all the way down the block sometimes," he added with perfect sincerity. The potential buyer left without making an offer. So Melissa and Alex were the only ones to make an offer. They still had to pay more than they'd planned, but not as much as the greedy bastards wanted. My friends signed the papers and paid the deposit that day. So when the brave buyer who'd talked to our friend put in an offer of $30,000 more than my friend's 2 days later, there was nothing the owners could do about it. Strict anti-gazumping laws. "Are you saying someone else offered significantly more?" Thomas sputtered over the phone when Melissa told them. "Yes," she replied calmly. "But as you know, we've already signed the contract. Legally, you can't back out now. I would have loved to see the owners' faces when they found out. Melissa called me the day they got the keys. "We did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We actually own this place now." "First order of business?" Alex called from the background. "New kitchen and fixing those damn drains. For all the people who are saying they had cheap rent, they didn't. $1,800 was the rent in 2020, and that was pretty high back then. By the time Mrs. Winters died, average rent for a house that size had only gone up by about $200. Nowadays, 4-bedroom houses in that area go for approximately $3,500 per month. The next one is an entitled people story. I run a small landscaping company that I built from the ground up over the past decade. Nothing fancy, just a solid business that keeps about 15 employees working year-round and serves residential and commercial clients throughout the metro area. When I say I'm the CEO, that sounds more impressive than it really is. I'm basically the owner who still gets his hands dirty when we're short-staffed and spends half his time doing paperwork in a cramped office that smells like fertilizer. The company owns a fleet of vehicles, mostly trucks and vans that we use for hauling equipment, materials, and crews to job sites. As the owner, I drove one of these trucks as my daily vehicle. It was a white F-250 with the company name and logo on the doors. Nothing outrageous, just professional lettering that said what we did. The truck was clean, well-maintained, and I parked it in my own driveway every night like a normal person. This setup worked perfectly fine for years, until my wife and I moved into a neighborhood with a homeowners association. I should have known better, honestly, but the house was perfect and in our price range. The HOA seemed reasonable enough during the buying process. They had the usual rules about lawn maintenance and fence colors, nothing that seemed too controlling. I figured I could deal with it. Everything was fine for about 3 months. Then I got the first letter. The letter came from the HOA board, specifically from the president whose name I won't mention, but who clearly had too much time on her hands. It stated that several neighbors had complained about my commercial vehicle being parked in my driveway. According to the letter, the HOA covenants prohibited parking commercial vehicles in driveways overnight, and I needed to find alternative parking immediately or face fines. I was annoyed but not overly concerned. I called the property management company that handled the HOA and explained that this was my personal vehicle. Yes, it had the company name on it, but it wasn't like I was parking a dump truck or a semi in my driveway. The woman on the phone was sympathetic, but said the board had the final say on covenant interpretations. So I did what any reasonable person would do and requested a hearing with the board. I showed up with my truck's registration, my business license, and a copy of the covenant language. I explained that I owned the company, that this was technically my personal vehicle even though it was registered as a fleet vehicle, and that it was no different from someone who drove a company car home from their office job. The board president was having none of it. She kept emphasizing that the covenant said no commercial vehicles, and my truck clearly had commercial signage. Another board member pointed out that the covenant was designed to prevent the neighborhood from looking like a parking lot for work vehicles. They wanted to maintain property values and aesthetics. I tried explaining that my truck was cleaner and better maintained than half the personal vehicles on the street. I offered to park it in my garage, but the board president said that wasn't the point. The covenant said no commercial vehicles on the property, period. She suggested I could rent parking elsewhere or remove the company decals. That's when something clicked in my brain. The malicious compliance gears started turning. I asked for clarification. The covenant said no commercial vehicles on the property, correct? She confirmed. I asked if that meant vehicles registered as commercial or vehicles that looked commercial. She said both. Any vehicle that was used for business purposes or had commercial markings couldn't be parked overnight in driveways or on the street in front of homes. I thanked them for their time and said I would comply fully with the covenant. Here's the thing about owning a business that nobody on that HOA board bothered to consider. I owned multiple vehicles. The landscaping company owned 12 trucks and 3 vans, all registered as fleet vehicles. But I also owned the company, which meant I technically owned all those vehicles personally through my business entity. More importantly, my wife and I also had a personal sedan and an SUV that we'd purchased through the company for tax purposes. Both were registered as company fleet vehicles even though we used them for personal transportation. This is completely legal and a common business practice. The vehicles were part of the company assets and we could use them as owner-operators. After the hearing, I went back and read through the HOA covenant very carefully. The language was clear. No commercial vehicles could be parked on the property overnight. It defined commercial vehicles as any vehicle used for business purposes or registered as a commercial or fleet vehicle. Under this definition, literally every vehicle I owned was a commercial vehicle. My wife's SUV, my sedan, everything. The covenant made no exception for vehicles that were also used personally or for vehicles owned by business owners who happened to live in the neighborhood. I started making phone calls. First, I called the property management company and informed them that I would be complying with the covenant immediately. I would no longer park any commercial vehicles at my residence. The woman on the phone sounded relieved and thanked me for being reasonable. Then I called a lawyer who specialized in business law and HOA disputes. I explained the situation and asked about my options. He laughed when he understood what I was planning and confirmed that yes, if the covenant banned commercial vehicles and all my vehicles were technically commercial vehicles, then I legally couldn't park any of them at my house. The next morning, I arranged for every single one of my vehicles to be towed to a commercial parking lot I rented across town. My work truck, my wife's SUV, my sedan, all of it. The house had an empty driveway and an empty garage. We had no way to get to work or go anywhere. I then sent a certified letter to the HOA board and the property management company. In it, I explained that I was fully complying with the covenant as they had interpreted it. Since all vehicles I had access to were registered as commercial fleet vehicles, I could not park any of them at my residence. I noted that this compliance came at a significant financial cost to me, as I was now paying for commercial parking and ride-sharing services to get to and from the parking lot each day. I also mentioned that I would be unable to respond to any property maintenance violations in a timely manner since I no longer had transportation readily available. If the HOA needed me to address any issues with my property, they should provide reasonable notice to account for my transportation difficulties. The letter concluded with a request for the HOA to clarify how I, as a homeowner, was supposed to maintain transportation while complying with their interpretation of the covenant. The response took about a week, and it wasn't what they expected to send. The board president called me directly, which was against their own procedures. She was frustrated and said I was being ridiculous. The covenant wasn't meant to prevent homeowners from parking their personal vehicles at their own homes. I calmly explained that I didn't have any personal vehicles. All my vehicles were commercial vehicles registered to my company. Under their interpretation of the covenant, which they had explicitly stated in our hearing, I couldn't park any of them at my property. She tried arguing that vehicles used for personal transportation should be exempt. I pointed out that this wasn't in the covenant language and that they had specifically rejected my argument that my truck was used for personal transportation. She'd said the covenant applied to vehicles used for business purposes, and I used all my vehicles for business purposes because I owned the business. The conversation went in circles for about 20 minutes before she hung up on me. Meanwhile, word was spreading through the neighborhood. Other residents started asking questions about the covenant. A few people who drove company cars home from work got nervous. Someone who ran a home-based consulting business and had a vehicle with their business name on it started asking if they were in violation too. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. They tried to pass a clarification to the covenant that would allow vehicles used primarily for personal transportation, but the vote failed. Enough homeowners were angry about the board's overreach that they voted against giving them more power to interpret the rules. At this point, I'd been without vehicles at my house for 3 weeks. It was costing me about $800 a week in parking fees and ride-sharing costs. but it was worth it to watch the board squirm. The board president eventually reached out through the property management company with a proposal. They would amend the covenant language at the next annual meeting to clarify that vehicles registered to businesses but used primarily for personal transportation by residents were permitted. In the meantime, they would grant me a temporary exception to park my vehicles at my residence. I responded that I appreciated the offer but couldn't accept a special exception that other residents didn't have. If the covenant said no commercial vehicles, I would continue complying with it until the covenant was officially changed. However, I would be happy to discuss my concerns at the annual meeting and support reasonable amendment language. The property management company representative sighed audibly when she read my response over the phone. The annual meeting was scheduled for 2 months later, but the board called a special meeting after another month of me having no vehicles at my house. They wanted to address the issue immediately. The meeting had the best turnout in the HOA's history because everyone wanted to see how this would resolve. At the meeting, the board proposed new language that would prohibit commercial vehicles being used primarily for commercial purposes from overnight parking, with exceptions for vehicles that were primarily used for personal transportation by residents. It was clunky language, but it was better than what they had. I spoke during the comment period and said I thought the amendment was reasonable. I also suggested that the covenant should include language defining what made a vehicle look commercial, since that was the original complaint. Several other residents agreed, and after some debate, they added provisions about signage size and vehicle type. The amendment passed with overwhelming support. I was finally able to park my vehicles at my house again. The board president avoided making eye contact with me during the vote. The best part came a few weeks later when I saw her driving a minivan with a small decal on the back window advertising her husband's real estate business. Under the original covenant interpretation she'd pushed, that would have been a violation too. She'd never thought about that until other people started pointing it out. I still live in that neighborhood and I still park my work truck in my driveway. The truck is clean, well-maintained, and complies with all the new covenant provisions. The HOA board has never bothered me about parking since then. The board president eventually stepped down, though I don't think my situation was the only reason. The whole experience cost me several $1,000s and was incredibly inconvenient, but it was worth it to prove a point. Sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable rules is to follow them exactly as written until the people who made them realize how unreasonable they were. And sometimes, the people who are quickest to enforce rules on others are the ones who haven't thought through how those rules might apply to themselves. My truck still sits in my driveway every night, and nobody says a word about it anymore. The next one is a petty revenge story. I review a lot of businesses for fun. It's a hobby of mine, and I get perks from it. I went to a restaurant for dinner one evening and planned to use a discount voucher for a portion of the meal. It was expiring that day, so I wanted to use it before I lost it. When we arrived, we were waiting for a long time for anyone to even acknowledge our presence. The vibe was weird from the moment we entered, but I wasn't fazed by it. When someone finally said something to us, I explained that I would like to dine in and use the voucher I purchased. The person seemed confused about the voucher. She got the owner involved, and that person said that I would not be able to use the voucher. I asked for the reason why, and she said it's too late to use. I pointed out the expiration date, and she got very nasty with me, saying she wouldn't be honoring it. I said that it was fine, and that her not honoring it meant I would get my refund. She kept on ranting about the voucher as I left. I wrote a review. I was honest about the interaction and explained everything just as I have here. This woman proceeded to message me about my review and cursing at me in the messages. I told her that I can honestly describe the experience I had at her establishment and that if she did not want customers using discount vouchers within the time period allowed, she should not participate with the voucher site. I reminded her that it doesn't matter how good her food is if she treats people like garbage. This fool proceeded to make disparaging remarks about a particular group of people, saying that I should be happy going to other restaurants knowing that insert that group here are in the back making the food. I thanked her for the responses that I proceeded to screenshot and post under her business listing. She stopped messaging me, and those screenshots are still on her business listing. Funny enough, her business is in an area where that particular group live. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Long-time lurker, but I finally have something to share that's happened within the last few months. I work as a senior graphic designer for a company for 5 years now. Originally, it was only a team of 3, a marketing manager, a marketing executive, and myself. The former 2 have since quit, and you'll find out later why. A huge part of my job is to handle a huge advertising schedule in a project management system, PMS, for which I design print/digital ads for. Enter My difficult micromanaging manager, he's the VP of sales and marketing who's been with the company for 30 plus years. His way of quality control is to force all our marketing materials to go through an approval process in our PMS in which everyone else has to give their feedback, and only then will my manager will give the final sign-off once it reaches him. On top of that, he insists on being copied on every notification for every single step of the way. So every single ad I produced had to be sent through our PMS while tagging the product managers and proofreaders. Those individuals would then comment feedback for changes needed, or if the ad is approved, they'd mark it complete and then send it along to the next person. It would end with this micromanaging manager who'd have the final say on whether it's good to be sent out or not. Sometimes the process would be flawless, as everyone would approve it the first time with no changes needed. But when it got to my manager, he'd reject it, and I'd have to do it over pending his remarks. The thing with our PMS is that you can see timestamps of when people viewed updates. He's on our project board, so he gets all the updates, and he could have easily interceded earlier and let me know if changes were needed to pass his check so I'd not waste my time. But because of the way he is, he only wants to see the final drafts after everyone else sees them. Everyone else always seems to move things along in a timely fashion. But when it finally gets to my manager, he'd just let it sit, and then you'd have to constantly check to see if he marked it off. When I pushed back and stated how arduous this all is, his tone-deaf reply was to have it done 3 months in advance. He also insisted that the ads I produced have to look different each time for each publication's insertion order. So after 4 years of handling all this by myself, I was barely meeting deadlines, and the quality of my work started slipping as I was making really stupid mistakes. Every few months, I would ask my manager if we're going to hire an additional designer for our department since we're doing more marketing, and every year I'd hear, "It's not in our budget right now." Things came to a head during one of my biannual reviews, where I told my manager bluntly, in front of HR, that we desperately needed to hire an additional designer, as there was no way for me to hit the 3 months ahead goal that he keeps parroting. He actually asked me, and I quote, "Is it typical for companies to have more than one graphic designer?" I'm dead serious. I showed how I handled everything by myself as best as I could at that point, and I was getting burnt out. For those that may ask why I stay, they compensate me very well without having to commute into a major metropolitan city. A golden handcuffs situation, if you will. By the end of the meeting, my manager finally caved and gave me permission to hire an additional designer who started with us this past January. While showing him the ropes on our design systems, he told me the manager said something snarky to him along the lines of, "I never imagined having to hire 2 designers. You guys should have no problem being 3 months ahead on ads now. Are you kidding me?" Over the years, I watched my manager as he hired a plethora of account executives and replacements for our department, most of whom quit within months under his watch. But he's going to give me crap for needing one designer after I made things work for 4 years by myself? I was so infuriated by his comments that I decided, he wants ads done 3 months in advance? Okay, bet. I trained the new designer on our approach to the advertising schedule in the PMS and the ins and outs of the approval process, and we went to work. We both proceeded to bury my manager in notifications as we churned out ad after ad after ad, pushing items through the pipeline with my manager receiving notifications on every single update. When the tasks ended at him and we got no response, we set up automations to ping him every hour calling for his approval. We also would send detailed weekly reports stating our progress, and also made it inherently clear to mention our goal was to be 3 months ahead of deadlines. By this past May, in time for one of my biannual reviews, my manager made an announcement. He announced my coworker, the marketing assistant, would be promoted to the vacant marketing manager position. Furthermore, they would now be handling the advertising schedule and be the final point person going forward. My manager also asked to have all notifications for him be removed, as he didn't have the bandwidth anymore to monitor it and is taking a step back from overseeing us. We collectively broke my manager after only 5 months of doing exactly what he asked, and I've got to say things have improved greatly so far. Our new marketing manager is very laid back as we're still getting things done ahead of schedule, and he is really good at what he does. We've also since hired 2 more additional employees for our department, and we've been steadily growing. My newly promoted coworker recently joked with me and the junior designer about how he wanted to go over the advertising schedule for next year with our manager, but he elected to not see anything and fully trusted my coworker to handle it completely on his own. Funny how that works. The next one is an entitled people story. I'm a 30YO guy from Mexico. Lived in Atlanta for a while. Opened a small Brazilian bar. I speak Portuguese. Most of my friends are Brazilian. Met this girl from Portugal. We started dating. Few months in, she fights with her roommate when the lease ended. She had nowhere to go, so I let her move in with me. I was living alone with my dog in a 3-bedroom. Later, her family came from Portugal, and I even let them stay too. Things were good. We even started a cleaning company that was doing really well. We rented a bigger place together. She was great, except sometimes drank too much. Lease was under my name since I had the papers. Day we moved in, we had a dumb fight. Don't even remember why. Fights kept happening, so eventually we agreed to break up but keep the business 50/50ths and live together until lease ended. One night, her mom knocked on my door saying my ex was acting weird. I checked, she was just drunk and half asleep. We even joked a little and I told her mom to let her rest. Next day, around 8 p.m., I hear her weakly calling my name. I go to her room, she's vomiting. I thought hangover, but when she looked at me, she was pale, lips blue, barely talking. She pointed at the bed, half-empty bottle of Tylenol night and pills scattered. She had OD'd. I called 911, checked her pulse. While on the phone, she stopped breathing. Pure panic. I started CPR. Paramedics showed up, took her away. She survived, but spent 10 days in the hospital and 10 more in a psych hospital. Got diagnosed bipolar. During that time, she didn't want me to leave her side. After she came home, she even slept in my room again because she didn't want to be alone. For like a week, things felt normal. Then chaos again. What really messed me up, though, was what happened that night. Watching her literally die in my arms messed with my head. After she got out of the hospital, I couldn't eat, dropped almost 15 kilograms, approximately 30 lbs, because I just never felt hungry. Couldn't sleep more than 2 hours a night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see her face turning blue. Later, I realized it was PTSD, but at the time I just thought I was falling apart. She started seeing someone else almost immediately. Whatever, we were done. But one day she barges into my room, telling me she's renting my room and I need to move out. I laughed and kicked her out of my room. Lease had all our names anyway. A week later, I'm eating breakfast. 6 sheriffs bang on the door with guns out. She had filed a TRO against me, saying I threatened and hit her. They escorted me out with only my dog. No wallet, no cash, no clothes. For 2 weeks until court, I lived in my Camaro with my dog. Showered at the gym, used quick-trip bathrooms, tried to get pro bono help, but nobody took it. One night, cops woke me up after someone reported me. I explained my situation, and one of them was like, "Wait, do you live in that house with the X cars outside?" Turns out they were the same cops from the night I did CPR. They couldn't believe it. Gave me the report number, their names, said they'd testify if needed. Court day came. She had her family, 3 friends, and a lawyer. I had just me, LOL. I was nervous as hell, thought I was screwed. But in the end, the judge didn't believe a word of her lies. Judge even warned her not to use the court system for revenge again, or she could face charges. I walked out relieved, but when I got back home, my room was emptied. Cash, cards, passport, visa, gone. My flight back to Mexico was in a couple days anyway, so I ended the lease, paid the penalty, donated my stuff, left my car outside, and went back to Mexico. What a nightmare. Anyway, thank you for watching.